All right, let's jump right in. We're going to tackle a huge question today. How is all this technology we use day in and day out changing not just what we know, but who we are? I mean, we're constantly plugged in, right? So what is that actually doing to the wiring inside our heads?
So let's start with the big one. The debate you've probably heard a million times. Is technology making us dumber? You hear this a lot, especially when people talk about younger generations. You might have even heard about the Flynn effect. That's the long-term trend of IQ scores going up for decades. But well, lately that trend seems to be slowing down, or even stopping in some places. And you know what gets the blame? Yep, our devices. But here's the thing, the real story isn't quite that simple. It's not a straightforward case of us getting dumber. Psychologists will tell you that intelligence isn't some fixed number that just goes up or down. It's way more like a muscle that adapts. Our brains are literally reshaping themselves to fit the world we live in now, a world that is totally and completely hyper-connected.
Think of it like this. We're making a trade. We're trading one set of cognitive skills for another. So we're moving away from things like deep memorization, the kind of skill you needed to cram for a test back in the day. And instead, we're building up a whole new skill set, being able to find information incredibly fast, scanning and multitasking, and most importantly, knowing where to find the answer instead of having to hold it all in your head.
And there's actually a name for this reliance on outside systems. It's called transactive memory. The idea used to describe how, say, a couple would split up the job of remembering things. Maybe one person remembers all the birthdays, and the other one remembers when to pay the bills. Well, today, for almost all of us, the internet has become our main transactive memory partner.
So this idea of the internet basically acting as our brain's external hard drive, it's not just a neat analogy. It's a fundamental cognitive strategy, and researchers have a specific term for it.
It's called cognitive offloading. And here's the really important part. This is something we humans have always done. I mean, writing itself, the abacus, calendars, those are all ancient ways of offloading our thinking. The only thing that's different now is that our digital tools have put this instinct on absolute hyperdrive. It's instant and it's constant.
And when that offloading becomes so constant, so seamless, it pushes us into some really weird and fascinating territory. We're forced to ask a truly mind-bending question. Where do we stop and our tools begin?
Way back in 1998, this is long before the iPhone was even a thought, two philosophers, Andy Clark and David Chalmers, asked this exact question. They came up with this groundbreaking idea they called the extended mind thesis. And basically, they argued that our minds aren't necessarily stuck inside our skulls.
To explain it, they used this simple but really brilliant little story. Let's meet Inga and Otto. So Inga hears about a cool museum exhibit. She thinks for a second, consults her own biological memory for the address, and heads out the door. Now, Otto has Alzheimer's, so to remember things, he carries a notebook everywhere. He hears about the same museum, pulls out his notebook, looks up the address, and he also heads out the door.
So here is the big question this whole experiment raises. From a purely functional point of view, Otto's notebook is doing the exact same job as Inga's biological memory. It stores information, he trusts it, and he can access it automatically whenever he needs to. So, if it acts just like memory, why wouldn't we consider it part of his mind?
This core idea is called the parity principle. It's really the heart of the whole extended mind argument. It completely challenges our gut feeling that thinking has to happen inside your head. It says if an object out in the world functions identically to a process in your head, then its location shouldn't matter. It's part of the thinking process.
Now, of course, not everyone agrees with this. There's a whole other school of thought called embedded cognition. These critics would say, sure, Otto's notebook is an essential tool his mind uses, but it isn't literally part of his mind. For them, the thinking still happens in the head. The notebook is just an instrument. It's a subtle difference, but it's a really important one.
Okay, so let's step away from the big philosophical debate for a second and look at some hard psychological evidence. Because beyond whether your phone is technically part of your mind, how does having Google in your pocket 24/7 actually make you feel about how smart you are?
Well, a really fascinating study set out to measure just that. The setup was pretty simple. Researchers had people answer trivia questions. For some questions, they could use a search engine, and for others, they couldn't. And after each round, the researchers asked them a very simple question. How high would you rate your own memory and ability to think right now? The results were pretty wild.
And here are those results. Just look at this. In that first session with no search access, people's belief in their own cognitive ability was about a 3.8. But then, in the second session, when they got to use a search engine, boom, it jumps up. Just having access to Google made them feel smarter.
And then, the second they took that access away again, their self-esteem just plummeted. But as soon as they got it back for the last round, it shot right back up again. You see this clear zigzag pattern, this direct link between having a search engine handy and how intelligent people felt they were at that moment.
So what does this all tell us? Well, the researchers concluded that we don't just see the internet as some separate, external library. We unconsciously start to blur the line between what's in our head and what's on the web. We actually start to mistake the internet's knowledge for our own.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together now in our final section and see what this all means for our modern minds.
So, let's just recap the journey we've been on. First, we saw that our brains aren't shrinking, our skills are just shifting. Second, we dove into the wild philosophical idea that our minds might literally extend into our phones. And third, we looked at the actual psychological proof that this partnership makes us feel smarter, blurring the lines of where our knowledge ends and the web's begins.
So, it's not really just about using technology anymore, is it? It's deeper than that. We are forming a brand new kind of mental partnership, a transactive memory system, where, in a very real way, our brains and our devices are starting to think together. We do the asking, they do the storing.
And that leaves us with one last, and I think pretty provocative question to chew on. If our thinking processes really are extending out into our phones and into the cloud, and we start to confuse its knowledge with our own, then who is actually the author of our thoughts? In this new partnership, who's really in charge?